That would be me. Yes, the man who respected archaeologists fight over his discarded apple cores. The man who once caught the Loch Ness Monster with a cane pole, but threw him back. It was only fair. One who goes big game hunting for dentists from Minnesota. But I only use a bow and arrow. Then I chase him around for about 40 hours or so. The man Freemasons strive to learn his secret handshake. And the man who's considered a national treasure in countries that he's never been to. It is I, the Sean. How are you? What's up? How you doing? As you can tell, once again, we have flying Mexicans with backpacks outside my window. Hold on 1 second. God bless it, these guys. What the hell is it? I thought they banned those things. Oh. All right. See, I just came outside and I scared him away. Ooh, see, now it's all quiet. All right. Never mind. It's adorable. Well, all right, a couple of comments. We have a fantastic guest on at 3:30 at the bottom of the hour here. The amazing, the stupendous, the spectacular Winston Shrout. If you've ever heard of Winston Shrout with his Winston Shrout Solutions in Commerce. What? Oh, see, he ran away, the Mexican guy. You know I was chasing him. Oh, now he's right outside my door. All right, there we go. Watch my special soundproof room. Does absolutely nothing at all. They took away my screen doors because the screen doors were already crap, and then the cats started going through them, started kind of pulling them up, and they have such fun because they love diving through the screen door. They know the screen door actually is frayed at the bottom, and there's a big hole in it, so the cats literally jump and dive through it, just as a game, just for fun. And the biggest thing they love is that I have these cheap ass, oh God, the rental slats, the plastic things that you have to twist with the bar, and then you have to get them all straight first so that they actually twist so you can push them out of the way. Bottom line is they're not curtains, and they don't keep light out at all, which means that about 6 o'clock in the morning as the sun rises, it comes right into my dismal little dungeon cell of a room. Ugh. All right. So a couple of interesting things are happening simultaneously. Yes, simultaneously, because I love using English-type words. Because I say it is tomato, it's tomato. So we have the Republican debate this evening, which is being sponsored by Fox News, which I just think is hilarious. So the Republican debate is tonight, and you have governors of states like Rick Perry, as an example, who I thought would be some kind of front runner, did not even make the top 10. Donald Trump is, of course, dead center. And this will be hilarious. The best presidential run ever would be if Donald Trump was the Republican candidate and Joe Biden was the Democratic candidate. Oh, my God, that would be funny. I would pay so much money to see that because it would be – hilarity would ensue. Let's just put it that way. Biden and Trump are basically stumbling, bumbling – trip over your own penis gaff machines. And opposed to the other side where I kid you not, it is the pantsuited Bataan Trail of Tears death march of the trotting, plodding progress of Hildebeest Rodham Clinton, where everybody simply says, well, she's the heir appointed. It doesn't matter what people think. It doesn't matter what people know. It doesn't matter that she's a murderess. It doesn't matter that she just let people die in Benghazi. So imagine what she'll do as president of the United States. It doesn't matter. As far as the media is concerned, she's the anointed one. She's the heir apparent. Unless another mulatto guy from Africa who knows how to give good speeches and gets in her way. And unless she then turns on herself and says, no, I'm going to give it to someone else. Now, Bernie Sanders, I mean, when Hillary Clinton goes places, nobody shows up. The media is trying to continue to tell you that she's the anointed one, but everywhere she goes, nobody shows. And again, I've used the joke once and I'll use it again. It's like a company that creates this new dog food. And they pull ads on the Super Bowl. They spend millions in advertising. They've got the E-Trade baby out there with his dog actually pimping for the stuff, and it doesn't sell. And the head of the company puts all of his CEOs together and all of his people, and he gets all of his employees in a in a big auditorium. And he says, why, after spending millions of dollars, why can't we sell this dog food? And the janitor's in the back with his bucket and his rag hanging out of the back of his pocket, and he's got his broom, and he raises his hand, and the CEO picks him, and he says, because the dogs don't like it. And that's pretty much it. And it's going to get worse as Hillary she's the Jacob Marley of American politics. Ebenezer, these are the chains I forged in life. She has so many skeletons in her closets. It's not even a closet. She's got mansions full of skeletons. And the closer we get to it, it's not just Benghazi. It's people she's murdered. She was the first lady of the United States to ever be called before a grand jury. Holy smokes. She's a crook. People don't like her. And the minute she gets rattled in a debate, she gets that. She sticks her little chin up and waggles her little witchy finger and gets that, I ate a canary and I have 2 canaries in my cheeks. I keep expecting Tweety Bird to pop out of her mouth at any moment, going, I thought I saw a putty tad. I did see a putty tad. So now we have the Republican debate. And the Republican debate has Donald Trump at center stage. Donald Trump is pulling crazy numbers, 28%. With Jeb Bush, somewhere around 10, I think. So, I mean, I can get you a list of the candidates and just show you crap. Now, on the other hand, with Hillary Clinton, you have Bernie Sanders. And people go crazy over Bernie. Now, Bernie Sanders is not a Republican nor a Democrat. He runs as an independent, but he's a socialist. He's an independent socialist from Vermont. Vermont? Yeah, I hope it's Vermont.
Yeah, it's Vermont. And the
Republicans. Isn't Joe Lieberman also an independent from Vermont as well?
Joe Lieberman used to be an independent. Then he started his own political party called I think it was called the Beagle-faced Jewish Guys Party. It was literally, he named the party after himself. It was like the Connecticut for Joe Lieberman Party or something.
That's crazy.
Joe Lieberman. I'm from.
So you had at one point you had two senators.
He did ultimately become like. Wait, did he stay independent? See, I don't even know.
No, he stayed independent. He stayed first. He flip-flopped from one. He did well. I'm not even going to talk about it. Don't get me off on Joe Lieberman. Please don't sidetrack me. It doesn't matter. I'm just saying. I believe Vermont had at one point 2 independent senators. The bottom line is that Bernie Sanders, he's pulling these big crowds. He is a devout, avid socialist, Marxist, communist who is, in essence, against the big companies and corporations and all that, which, of course, Hillary is not. Hillary is so in the pocket of Monsanto and the pharmaceutical companies. If you will remember, she started out raging against them. She pitched the exact same Obamacare, Affordable Care Act crap that Obama managed to blaze through when the we hate anybody that is a Bush 2008 election rolled around. And we thought, well, with Obama, we're not going to get any war. Guess what? You got lots more war. With Obama, we're going to get change. Well, you got change. What used to be dollars in your pocket is change. He didn't. He ran. He's the worst president. I mean, how the Republicans going to survive this guy? And unless we get somebody in that just reverses almost everything he's done in 8 years, we're doomed. We're just doomed. So, and Bernie Sanders, how do you vote for a guy who has hair that looks like he got his penis stuck in an electrical socket? Sorry, I got to give Jon Stewart some props for that. That was his joke on The Daily Show. So with the Republicans, it's going to be interesting tonight. We'll probably talk about it. Well, we will talk about it tomorrow on the show, but not today. The other thing is that Jon Stewart is now leaving The Daily Show. Tonight is his last night on The Daily Show after 17 years. Now, I used to watch The Daily Show back when it was funny, which it stopped being about 10 years ago. It got to the point where they are so smug and so head up their ass and so, well, you don't have Stephen Colbert anymore. You don't have Ed Helms. You don't have, all these people who went off to then, you don't have Steve Carell. All these people that went off to become like massive movie stars and TV hosts and all that. What used to be Saturday Night Live until Saturday Night Live completely sucked because that has been funny for over 20 years. Although the woman who does, I can't remember her name, but I think there's Denny O'Neil, who's the black guy who's hilarious. And then there's the woman who does the Justin Bieber and the Hillary Clinton impression, who, again, I can't remember her name, and she's one of the most brilliant comedians ever, physical comedians. And then I've watched The Daily Show. I've started taping it. I've watched the last week of it or so, about the last 2 weeks. And I began to realize that Jon Stewart, on the one hand, championed some things against the banks, championed some stuff against some pollution. But on the other hand, he is so the face of the left-wing, East Coast, establishment, liberal media. It got to the point where it's disgusting. And now got to the point in the last 2 weeks is all he does is yell the F word and jump up and down and tear up his paperwork and his notes like a monkey. And say F you to this guy and F you to the other guy. And, here's the review of my best stories, which is me yelling the F word again on television. Saying, no, F this guy and F this other guy and F-ity, 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 F-ity. I mean, he's an F machine, this clown. And then I began to realize also that even though he's been fair and balanced on a number of stories, even though he's called the media out numerous times in the course of the 17 years, at the same time, he has acted as the satire, laughter curtain, if you will, to stop anyone with any serious proof, I should say, anybody that has anything to do with conspiracies behind 9/11, anyone that talks about chemtrails, anybody that actually challenges the left-wing establishment on anything, you rolled them at the Daily Show. You sick the Daily Show on them to establish that laughter curtain, if you will, to make sure that those people are mocked, and they became basically an attack dog for the left-wing establishment media in so many ways. Although I can still pick things that he did in terms of, he's of course champions the whole nonsensical global warming theory. He did do some great stuff about the banks where nobody was punished about the breakdown. But we're talking about a career of 17 years, which is again funny for the first. And I used to watch Craig Kilborn back when Craig Kilborn used to do 5 questions, and when Stewart came in and tried to do the kind of more serious mock satire news stuff, I was like, well, good luck with this guy. So, and then he just morphed into an icon because he started taking on basically the nonsensical sector of the media. Well, and Fox News, but Fox News is pretty radical on the other side where they've got their entire agenda. And the reason most people watch Fox News is because at least Fox News is fairly positive about America and what we are. And Fox News, even though, I don't even know what to say about that. On the one hand, you've got Sean Hannity, who Sean Hannity he's Eric Cartman from South Park. If Eric Cartman grew up and had a talk show, it would be Sean Hannity, is all I can say. Listen to that pumpkinhead about what he has to say about all this, and it got to the point of where the Republicans are defending the massive amounts of money that have been spent on war, that have been spent on tearing apart the Middle East, that have been spent on, the mess that the Bushes have made. I mean, if I was Donald Trump and I was in the debates tonight and I really wanted to come out swinging, I mean, I would dismiss every single one of these candidates. I would look at Ted Cruz and say, dude, you're from Canada. You can't be president of the United States anyway. You're from Canada. Jeb Bush, oh yeah, buddy, we want more of you. Your brother wrecked this country. Your brother was the one that they elected Barack Obama in the first place. Your brother that was the one that spent trillions of dollars and thousands of American lives going into a war that everybody now thinks, including you, is a mistake. Why did we go in Afghanistan? We went in Afghanistan because we wanted to pump more heroin into the world. Why did we go to Iraq? Because some personal vendetta between the Bushes, and he tried to kill my daddy. It was personal. And we wanted to take Saddam Hussein's gold, and we wanted to take his oil off the market, number one, to make everybody's oil more expensive. And number two, Saddam Hussein was talking about creating his own oil bourse and basing the Iraqi dinar on gold. And that's why we wanted him gone. Was he some big savage? I mean, you can look at his invasion of Kuwait. After he went to the World Court, after he went to The Hague, after he went to the United Nations, after he got judgments against Kuwait for slant drilling into his oil in his country, asking the rest of the world to help him do something about it, he went to the United States and said, what would happen if I invade Kuwait and destroy their oil? And they said, in the United States, April Glasby and George Bush said, we have no opinions of Arab versus Arab conflicts. And then suddenly, oh my God, he's a monster. He's got weapons of mass destruction. We must use our psychic powers and abilities to know that he somehow preemptively we must go in and take away his weapons of mass destruction, which of course he didn't have anyway. And oops, the whole thing's a mistake. So now Jeb wants to come in saying he's not his brother, but he has all the same guys working for him. And you know who's going to be president of the United States in 2016? Dick Cheney. Because Dick Cheney's been president the whole time. He's been running things behind the scenes. So it'll be interesting to see what they all have to say. Rand Paul will get up there and say, oh, I don't think we should look down people's pants and read people's mail and, the security state and all that, blah, 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 blah. And Trump, I don't know if Trump's going to tear him apart or not, but it's just interesting because, Trump he's saying kind of the right things. And would he fix the country? I'm just wondering what a year of Donald Trump would be. 1, we would close the borders. 2, he would probably turn the White House into some sort of high rise. I'm convinced that the White House would be 33 stories, and he would put a big T on the top of it. It would be the Trump Tower White House, which I think would be fun. Hey, we would have a supermodel as First Lady of the United States. Yummy. We'd have somebody as good looking as as Putin's wife. Not some huge man thing. I don't even know what she looks like. Michelle Obama is scary. That's all I can say. Michelle/Michael Obama is a frightening, frightening looking woman. She looks like the salt monster from the second episode of Star Trek Classic. Sort of. And I'm sure at night she roams the streets of Washington, D.C., sucking the bodily fluids out of unsuspecting men everywhere. So let's talk about that. But let's talk about the real stuff. Let's talk about what are you going to be speaking to Winston Shrout today for about the next 90 minutes, if we can get a hold of him. So, any luck on finding him on Skype, Steve? Because we got to get this.
No, you haven't given me the Skype profile.
I know. Stop with the whining. Stop it. All right, I told you what his name was. Let me see.
Yeah, there's 50 search results for his name shown.
I got it, and it says English is the language, and he's got. I don't know how to do this other than. Okay, that.
Look, I gave you the PC version of what you need to do on your Mac, which is right-click on his name, go to View Profile, and then look where it says Skype. Just like your name on Skype.
Right.
It's different than the Sean, which is how it appears on Skype.
All right. Well, so let me give this to you again. Does that help you?
Let me see, because that's what you told me before, and I still got 50 search results when I punched it in.
Well, he's from the United States. He speaks English.
I'm going to add the first guy, and if it's the wrong guy, I don't know what to tell you.
The first guy, okay? I found him in 2 seconds, so I'm not sure what's up. Okay, so all right, you do that. And just tell me how it goes, and I'll read his bio when he actually gets on here. But the last time I went to a Winston Shrout seminar, he did his website is www.wssic.com. That's Winston Shrout SolutionsInCommerce.com. So if there's anyone out there that, and this was a seminar, I think there's like 1,000 people at the seminar in Arizona. And this is the Lord God King of people talking about the alternative law process, about defending yourself in court without having to use lawyers or attorneys, getting people out from under, various types of mortgage debt. Now, all he does, he teaches people. I actually help people do it. That's the whole point. I mean, I've taken on a lot of these cases and a lot of these people to help and assist you. Any luck with finding him? All right, Steve's off doing what he's doing. So if you have an idea,
I got him.
Oh, you got him. Okay. If you have an idea of something being savagely wrong, if you will, with the Matrix. If you've ever seen the Matrix films, and the reason they're so important, the first movie and maybe the second movie. The third movie takes some splaining, obviously, because you have the architect and he's got that big long 12-minute speech where he explains the Matrix. There is more wisdom in that movie than anything, but at some point they left about half an hour of the movie on the floor, which is on the cutting room floor, which is why it doesn't really make any sense towards the third one. They so desperately needed to derail the messages of that movie that at the end they just, as I said, just made it completely make not any sense. So what we're going to ask Winston today is who hacked the system? How did we get a government that went from, and remember, I'm not also even a huge fan really of the Constitution. Neither were the 13 colonies. The Constitution was a document that was feared at the time, which is another reason why we had to put in the Bill of Rights and the ability to amend the Constitution because we were afraid of it. Also, Thomas Jefferson was the one, even though his friend Jay became the first Chief Justice of the United States, even Jefferson was saying, what? What the heck is the Supreme Court about? We've got 9 people who get jobs for life working for the federal government who are going to decide matters of how powerful the federal government should be. How is that a good idea? So even Jefferson himself, one of the prime founding fathers, had serious problems with the form of government that they were coming up with. Now, please remember that the states were actually operating under the Articles of Confederation at the time, which everybody thought were perfectly fine. But then a group came in and said, well, we can't really fleece and or rape the states under this system. The states themselves have too much power. Therefore, and that was the whole thing about the Federalist Papers, we need to suck them up under some kind of centralized authority, which, again, in the final convention, it was Patrick Henry, realms, at the request and companionship of the Ascended Master Saint Germain. So there is a blend of our present 3D physical world as assisted from the higher dimensional beings. The goal of his organization, WSSIC, is for practical applications for solutions in commerce and also to assist those who are striving to reach new levels of spirituality to not be drugged down by commercial karma, and stresses that debt is a 4-letter word. He is the director of Winston Shrout Solutions in Commerce, and of course he is the amazing, the stupendous, the spectacular, that Kentucky farm boy, Winston Shrout. How are you? How are you, Winston?
Well, I'm doing just fine, Sean. As usual, you play things up pretty good, so I appreciate the introduction. I'm not much of a farmer, however, I do claim to be an H-generation hillbilly. So I think that would be more descriptive of who you're talking to.
So Winston Shrout from the mystical hills of wisdom. Oh, now I know what's going to happen here. This is a reason why we might need you to get the headphones, but I expect you'll do most of the talking because through your computer we're getting a feedback loop. So what is your opinion of how our original system was set up under what was the Articles of Confederation and then the Constitution? And how was it set up originally, and how was it hacked? How did they change the system to what we have today?
Okay, so I take it you want me to give a brief historical review.
I think it would be best in the context of where we're going to go with this as to because I mean, looking around today, Winston, and you and I both have the same opinion on this. I was just talking to my wife about this the other day, that her father, my father, well, let me say her father, who lives in Utah, had one job. The mother stayed at home. They had 5 kids. They had a motorhome. They took vacations to Disneyland 2 weeks out of every year. They had a cabin in the mountains. They had 2 cars, whatever else, off one person's salary. And then I look today, and we have kids graduating from college with anywhere between $30,000 and $200,000 worth of debt. We have the most indebted generation, the most slave-indebted generation in our history. We have taxes, insurance, government. I mean, at every side, we work more than feudal serfs did under that system in the Dark Ages. They used to have to work maybe 3 months for the feudal lord. Now, I think with state and federal income taxes and everything else, I think we don't stop working for the government until sometime around the middle of June. And I just keep thinking, and then you have debt slavery, and you've got the mortgage system, which is completely falling apart. How the hell did we become the slaves that we are today to everything is just so wrong with the Matrix? It's just cracked and it's broken. So I'm just curious as to how we got from where we were, which was the freest country on earth, to now having Vladimir Putin say that the United States is the new Soviet Union, which I agree with.
Well, let me express this to even start off any conversation about this, and that is debt is a concept. It's not a reality. It only becomes a reality when people make it so. And so as I go over this historical review, when I come up to the era of 1933, I'll demonstrate that. So if you want me to go into a little bit of a history here to bring us up to our present time, certainly I can do that at this point.
That would be great. Okay.
Well, first off, certainly your listeners would be very aware that as Napoleon said, History is just the story we tell ourselves. And so I was indoctrinated in the public school system, as I suppose you were and many of your listeners. And so the history that we received in that system was particularly crafted for a particular reason. Now, is that history accurate? Is it true? With a little bit of research and a little bit of digging in, you'll find out that probably most of that history was made up. So we need to go back and perhaps reevaluate our own history here, which includes the concepts of money. And when we get down to the 1933 period of time, I will demonstrate how the concept of money was radically changed. The only problem was the government didn't tell anybody. So we labored. We labored under previous concepts in a new system which are not compatible. And in consequence of that, as I mentioned, the word debt is a concept. It is not a reality. So let's go back and review history for a short period of time here for as I understand it. This is the story I tell myself. So people can evaluate it and go and do their research and see if they have drawn the same conclusions that I have, so that I can fit the history into reality as we have it. Again, the big problem in America is the Europeans.
That's funny.
My ancestors, of course, were all Europeans, so I guess I have to take part of that blame. But North and South America, when the Europeans first came, it was heavily populated. There were millions upon millions of people living here. And we sometimes refer to them as Native Americans or First Americans or however you want to say that thing. And even from that, those people who were here had come from different regions on the planet, centuries prior to that. But there were millions of people living here. And so the Europeans' main tool for taking over North and South America was disease, smallpox, plague, and all kinds of things, which the people who lived in the Americas did not have any natural defenses against. And in consequence of that, those diseases wiped out a good portion of the people who were living, in particular, let's just talk about North America. And so those diseases decimated the population, and so the Europeans had a much easier time of conquest. So anyway, a lot of the European people had come here, as they supposed, for religious freedom or freedom from tyranny, from the problems they had suffered with in Europe. The only problem was when they came, they brought those same problems with them. And so some of them did, in fact, investigate the systems of government and so forth that were in existence among the people who were here. And they learned quite a bit from that. And had they have implemented the full context of the societies, the governments, and so forth that they found, certainly we would have started off on a much better foot. However, the colonists, when they came here from Europe, for the most part, came under the burden of debt. Now, this is not a fictitious debt. This is a real debt, because back in those days, they were using gold, silver, and so forth as their money. And so we're talking about hard money debt here. That's what we're talking about.
Well, and they were coming here to flee the debtors' prisons of England and Europe as well, weren't they?
Certainly
Okay.
they were. So, but in any event, they came under the burden of debt to a large extent. And so the question was, how could they protect their investment, their assets here in this North America from seizure by the creditors? And so a plan was formulated. And what they decided to do was to create an aggregate corporation. Now, corporations generally are put in place to carry debt. And so that's exactly what the colonists did. They created an aggregate corporation, which was loosely known as the United States of America. Now, the way they did that was they created a document which was known as the Articles of Confederation, which assumed the debt of the people of the 13 states, or what was called colonies. And so in essence, what the people did was they shifted the liability from them individually off to a corporation, which was first known as the United States of America, and then it had other names, as we can talk about in a moment. But in consequence of that, the new corporation carried the burden of that debt, and as all corporations are, that corporation was bankrupt from the very start. Okay, so people have to conceptualize that our form of government, as we call it, is simply a corporation which carries debt and is bankrupt. Okay.
Okay.
So, in consequence of trying to operate under the Articles of Confederation, they decided perhaps there were other protections that needed to be put in place to protect their assets. So in consequence of that, they created something which we refer to as the Constitution for the United States of America, which had a greater impact to protect the bankrupt corporation.
Okay.
So, yeah. So, national bankruptcy is for a period of 70 years. And so if you start counting the clock from 1789, which was the period of the first bankruptcy, you come down to 1859. Now, by that time, the debt had not been paid. And of course, the creditors being the Crown of England, Bank of England, East India Trading Company, and various other crowns and royalties and so forth. So, even though they had passed through 70 years of bankruptcy protection, the debt had not been successfully resolved in that 70 years. So it was anticipated that they would go into another period of 70 years of bankruptcy. And basically that was the cause of what we call the Civil War, in the respect that the northern states, but in particular the federal government, put their eye onto the assets which were being held by the states. I mean, the southern states, right, was freehold. Yeah.
We read a story about how Abraham Lincoln, we're not a big fan, but when Lincoln got into office, the original version of the 13th Amendment that they don't want to tell you about in the movie or anywhere else, the original 13th Amendment was an offer to the states, to the southern states, that said, look, if you will pay this crazy tax that he was trying to put on the southern states, which was amounting to something like 30 to 40% of a tax on agriculture, I will put in this amendment that you can keep your slaves, that slavery will be institutionalized in the Constitution forever if you will pay this tax. And the state said no thanks, and so then he approached Robert E. Lee, and he wanted Robert E. Lee to take over the army. And then when Lee found out that Abraham Lincoln wanted him to use the army against the South was when he quit and said no thank you. So continue.
Well, first off, by 1859, 1860 period of time, in the South, slavery was basically fading out. With the invention of machinery such as the cotton gin and all those kinds of things, slavery in the South simply was not profitable.
Where Eli Whitney was famous to say, "Hey, get your cotton picking hands off my gin." You're the only person who would think that joke was funny, but so go ahead.
No, I think everybody might think that's funny. Anyway, certainly the what's called the Civil War was not a civil war, and it was not a war between the states. It was a continuation of what George Washington had done when he attacked Pennsylvania. Lincoln simply carried on as commander-in-chief, as he supposed, a war against the states. And so the real thing that was happening at that time was the federal government was attacking all of the states. And as we see the results of what happened at the cessation of all that business, what followed, it's obvious what that war was all about. But not getting on to the war routine, as I mentioned, from 1789 until 1859, the first 70-year bankruptcy came to an end, and so they had to determine what would they do. At that point, the British, the French, and some of the other Europeans were poised and ready to come in and divide up the Union of States as the creditors. And a lot of people don't know it, but probably the only thing that prevented that was actually the Russian Tsar, what was his name, Nicholas or whoever, who sent the Russian fleet into New York Harbor and also into San Francisco Harbor because the British were poised right there in Canada to make an attack into there, and then certainly Maximilian was sitting on the throne in Mexico representing the French interest, and they were prepared to attack from the south, and so they were going to squeeze the United States of America in such a way as to divide it up between the creditors.
Okay.
Now, so as a result of that, when the creditors were prevented from militarily attacking and seizing assets by the Russians, then it was contemplated to go into another 70 years of bankruptcy to see what could be done. Now, during that period of time, or all through this period of time, we're seeing some interesting things happening with money, with banking, all these kind of things. I mean, we had well, you can go back and study all that. I don't need to go into that. But point being that the second 70 years of bankruptcy was entered into, which brings us up to the date of 1929.
Right, yes.
Now, I think everybody pretty much familiar with what happened in the 1929 period of time because, again, even after another 70 years, the creditors had not been satisfied. And so, you know, I mean, as kind of a strong-arm tactic, the Great Depression was manufactured to simply show those upstart Americans just how powerful those creditors were. So, again, we run into a new problem here. We'd gone through the second period of bankruptcy. It had not been settled, so it was contemplated to enter into a third period of bankruptcy. Now, this period of bankruptcy is an interesting historical time, and when we get back to the 1933 period to see what had happened to accommodate this, then perhaps it'll make more sense. However, in the third period of bankruptcy, they introduced the Old Testament concept of slavery. Now, prior to that time, with the African people, the Irish, the Chinese, and some other ethnic groups and so forth who have been involved in involuntary servitude. So that was really what was happening. And so our history books and so forth are calling what happened in those early times slavery, but it was not. It was what we call involuntary servitude. But when we go into this third period of national bankruptcy, it was determined to introduce the true concept of slavery as it has been outlined, which means that if a debtor has no other means to pay a debt, they can go into slavery and work it off. Okay. So it was determined to introduce slavery in that third period, and so then the question was, what kind of process or how is it that we'll go about using this concept of slavery to pay off the creditors? And so that'll be the subject as I go a little bit further into this. But let's take the 70 years a little bit further as proof of what I've been saying here, because when you come up to 1999, the President of the United States, who was wearing two hats, by the way, but I'll talk about that in a moment. Anyway, President Bill Clinton, God love his heart, made the statement, "I'm the last United States president." And he was. The reason being that, number one, through the principle of slavery, the creditors had been satisfied. In consequence of that, the declaration of bankruptcy, or what we call the Constitution for the United States of America, was completed. In other words, Articles of Confederation and the Constitution for the United States were actually the terms and conditions of bankruptcy protection. And so when Bill Clinton gets up and says, I'm the last United States president, if he ever told the truth, he told it that time. Now, for those of us who were kind of keeping our ear pretty close to the ground and watching the developments as 1999 came to a close, we saw some very interesting things transpire. For instance, before Bill was able to escape from office, he was forced to sign into law NESARA. Now, I'm not going to get into NESARA so much, simply to say that it was fully intended to be implemented. It was not implemented because of 9/11 in 2001. Had it not been for that, we would be operating totally different than we presently are. But because of the events around 9/11, a military coup, actually it wasn't military, it was a corporation coup that took place to take control of the United States and the people here. Now let me back up for a moment, back to the Civil War era, whereas the federal government had completely subjugated the Union of States. What happened was that at that point, then the Union of States came under military occupation. And the rules of engagement, or the rules of conduct for the military with that military occupation, is what's known as the Lieber Code. And so people can go and study and look at that and so forth, so they can understand a little bit about that. But at that same period of time, it was determined that this new federal government needed to have a seat of government.
And take a breath right there, Winston, because this is our hard break coming. Now, I'm going to take the blue pill and go back to sleep. Thanks for everything. Anyway, welcome back to Strange Universe Radio. Clips from The Matrix. Can you imagine that movie was 1998, 1999, I think it was, at that particular period of time. So pretty amazing stuff. Winston Shrout is, of course, my amazing, stupendous, spectacular guest, and he is here to giving us all the history of this. Also, he's got a seminar coming up, and he runs For the last 10 years, he's been running WSSIC, Winston Shrout Solutions in Commerce, where he has lectured all across the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and even Panama. And we're going to work on trying to get him into Ireland as well, because I've been talking to people over there. Antonia Leslie, Lady Antonia Leslie. She's been in the process of actually moving out into Castle Leslie, that you may or may not have heard of. You've seen it on TV and all that. So, Winston, where were we? We're, I think, somewhere in the Matrix timeline of around 1933, correct?
Well, first off, before I go to 1933, I want to give a pop quiz.
Okay.
It's a one-question quiz.
Yes, sir.
For you and for all your listeners. And the question is, what is the capital of the United States of America?
Wow, good question. Okay, well, capital of the United States of America. All right, I would say, in my ignorance of the Matrix, that it would be Washington, D.C.
Okay, you failed. Go to the back of the class.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so stupid.
The capital of the United States of America is Philadelphia.
What? Wow. So going back to the original capital of the United States, which was Philadelphia, then New York, then Washington, D.C. So why is the original constitutional capital still Philadelphia?
Well, I mean, that's how it all started, but people generally say Washington, D.C., which is the capital, or let me put it this way. Washington, D.C. is not the capital of anything. It's the headquarters of the corporation known as the United States Incorporated.
Okay.
Now, let me tell you how that worked. As I had mentioned, the federal government won the war. They put the whole of the country under military occupation, and in consequence of that, they needed a headquarters. And so at that time, Washington, D.C., as I understand it, was actually comprised of about 5 different jurisdictions. So in 1971, they combined all of those jurisdictions into one, and they became the city-state known as Columbia.
Okay.
Now, when you put district in front of Columbia, what you have a military district. Anytime you see that word district, start thinking because it implies that it is under military rule. All right. Now, in 1978, they had to incorporate that and reorganize it, blah, blah, blah. The federal government was not able to meet the debt that they had incurred with that war. In consequence of that, in 1903, it was obvious that the new corporation could not meet that burden of debt. And so they started preparations. I think everybody's well aware of all that business with Jekyll Island and all that junk. But in any event, in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was created. It was put into effect, not according to the old way under the Constitution for the United States of America, but under the Constitution of the United States of America. Now, those are 2 different words. For and of are 2 completely different words, have different meaning and different concepts, and grammatically, if you consider the word of, which is OF, it can be translated or it can be defined as without. Okay, so let's say this again. The Constitution without the United States of America. Does that make sense? Now, when they rewrote that original Constitution, they included also in that the 14th Amendment. And for the most part, if you go read the statutory Constitution of the United States of America, almost all of it is contained in brackets. Now, Sean, you tell me what legal effect anything on a document has if it is in brackets.
Means it doesn't exist on the page.
Oops.
Yeah. Well, in legal documents, if you put something in brackets or or even parentheses, I think as well. It's like a sidebar that doesn't exist in court or on the page,
Correct.
as I understand it.
Now you'll notice that the 14th Amendment is not in brackets, and there's a couple of the other provisions which are not in brackets also. But that should be a real telling sign. So when you consider the Constitution of, in your mind, think without the United States of America, what does that conjure up in your logic process? You see. And so people need to think about the words that they see, because words have real legal meaning. So, in consequence of all that, they statutized the Constitution for the United States of America. They put almost all of it into brackets. And so really we're being governed under that new federal corporation government by the 14th Amendment. But it gets worse yet.
No, please, no, stop.
It gets worse yet.
Oh, my God.
Oh, geez, man, I tell you what, our history is so screwed up. But anyway, all right, so 1913, Federal Reserve Act was passed through the corporate stockholders. And so was it legal or not? Yes, it was legal. Because by that time we were operating as a corporation. The Congress and so forth was simply the board of directors. And so the board of directors pushed through in 1913 Federal Reserve Act, and under international law, if a group do not object to something, then by the precept of proscription, then that thing after 20 years becomes law. So, in 1933, the Federal Reserve Act, however you look at it, became law, and it became binding on all corporate members, all of which were delineated as U.S. citizens according to the 14th Amendment, which was one of the few things in the corporate charter which was not put in brackets.
Huh.
Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so now we got a whole new deal going on. I mean, FDR shuffled them cards, and gave us a new deal. The only problem was he was dealing off the bottom of the deck.
Right.
Yeah, so we got that problem going on here. But what everybody has to realize, and this is an important concept, and write this down, and write it 1,000 times if you have to until you get it into your brain, and that is this. And this is one of the maxims of law. In my words, I can't quote it exactly as it's written, but here's what it is. Whoever creates the liability must provide the remedy. So okay. The question is there a remedy provided for the Federal Reserve Act and the consequences of that? And the answer is yes. The problem was that 99.9% of the people in America did not realize all this historical change that had gone on. So when the remedy was provided for the problem caused by the Federal Reserve Act, they simply didn't know what it was, and they did not seek it out. My grandparents, my parents, all of whom were alive during 1933, had operated on the hard money concept. But in 1933, all of that changed, but nobody was aware of it, and we've only just basically become aware of it in the last, 20 years.
Right.
So, the remedy is this. Now let me explain. When the government, whatever you want to call it, the government of the United States, the United States Incorporated, or whoever the powers were at that time, when they took gold and silver out of commerce, they had to bring a remedy. And the remedy was in the form of negotiable instruments.
Okay.
in particular promissory notes and bills of exchange. Now, one of the first things that I studied, when I started on my journey, was I took a college course in negotiable instruments. And I studied and studied and studied negotiable instruments until I finally figured out that I knew a little bit about it, put it that way. But I will say that I can recognize a negotiable instrument when I see it. And I see it everywhere in our present commercial system. And so most people don't see it that way because they don't understand money, and they don't realize that there was a change in the money system in 1933. Now, because the remedy had to be guaranteed or bonded, the United States government at that point became what we call a constitutor, which means that they guaranteed the debt of all the United States citizens. Okay? So the debt really belongs to the United States government. It does not belong to the individual.
Well, I thought once we got off gold and silver, went to the whole concept of the people are the credit of the nation.
Well, that's one way to look at it. But with this new system that came in that operated totally with negotiable instruments rather than gold and silver or gold and silver certificates, then we moved into a new era. Now, some people look at this and are angry. Get over your anger. In my estimation, in the way that I see it, it was actually a good thing because of the wrapping up events that we're going through right at this moment as the planet moves into a new paradigm. And that is, we have had a return and a huge influx of souls back onto the planet, which we could not have provided for using gold and silver. We had to go to negotiable instruments and at this point computer money in order to accommodate the 7 billion people that are on the planet at this present time. So as for myself, I got over my anger. I put it aside when I started to realize the consequence of so many people on the planet for this final thrust, if I can put it that way. So
well, I've tried to tell people, the same people that I keep saying, that our goal is to go to peace with these people, not to be at war with them, and that the system is just fine. We just have to figure out how to work it, and that we never could have built the Western civilization that we had based on gold and silver unless you start using negotiable instruments and blips of light and made up money, if you will. Then nothing we have today would be able to be. We would not have the civilization we had if we were still back in the gold and silver age.
Exactly, we'd be still riding on horses and push carts.
Correct.
And so we had to go to a new system, and all this was provided for. Whether or not FDR and those people around him were cognizant of the future and the implications that would come from their actions, I don't know. But in consequence, whether they did it by accident or somebody prompted them to do it that way, or they were actually intelligent enough to realize that, I can't say. But we do have what we have. The system is in place, and there ain't nothing wrong with the system. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So, as I have pointed out, as I have moved into the quote-unquote UFO ET community thought process, I keep saying that we do have a system in place that would allow us to do commerce with people from other planets. It's already in place. All we have to do is utilize it. And so that's what basically, my education has been about. is to help people to understand the system and how to work it properly, and stop all this fighting over all this stuff.
Right.
Just learn how to do it, and let's go forward with it. So the remedy is there. The remedy is there.
Do you think the challenge is, though, Winston, because you and I have talked about this, for example, there is a process that we call accepted for value, and you can actually take a presentment and return the presentment. In other words, they give you a charge, you give them a discharge, but it seems, once again, it's not just about greed, it's about obscene avarice and greed, if you will, that they have now been, you were saying they've now been taking these A for Vs where people have been, and this is a process which if people want to contact me or you or whatever, they can talk about. But there's a way to actually pay your debts, if you will, or set off, settle, and discharge a debt by taking the bill that they send you and marking it a certain way and sending it back to them. It does work, but then they take the money, shuffle it off to India, I think you were saying, and yet still charge the people here. Even though the bond process works constitutionally, the banks still don't accept it and simply count on people's ignorance, usually until you get to the courts, until you get to judges who use bonds every day. That's the only way you seem to get remedy. And quite frankly, it's a huge amount of trouble.
Well, it is, and that's what we're trying to do, is to enlighten as many as we can. I will have to say this: if people are knowledgeable about what's been referred to as the 100th monkey concept, we have far exceeded the minimum requirement, and now the information that I've been giving out for so long, and others, is a part of the collective consciousness.
Yes.
And easily accessible. All you have to do is reach up and it's there for you. So we are in an age of enlightenment. If people can shed previous concepts, the old paradigm, as we call it, I think James Gilliland calls it the old programs,
right,
that we seem to cling to, and start to realize that these things are in place for us so that we can move forward in our journey to join with our galactic cousins. It's all here. We have it. We just need to know that it's there and understand it and use it. Now, you had made reference to something called accepted for value. When you start to study negotiable instruments, there are only two kinds of instruments. One is a promissory note, which is a promise to pay at some future time, which is a discharge item. And then the other type of negotiable instrument is a draft, or what we would call a bill of exchange, which differs from a promissory note in as much as the bill of exchange is used for set-off and closure to settle the account to zero. Now, zero is a very, very important concept, and I've lectured on that quite a bit, but without going into that again, unless I need to here, the accepted for value process creates a bill of exchange. That's what it does. And so there's a little bit of technology and so forth that's involved with that, but acceptance for value has gained a lot of attention across the country and across the planet. It is, in fact, the technique which is used to pass the debt back, Treasury direct, to the surety for the debt, and that surety is the gold that underwrites the world's currencies, which is under the control of the Office of International Treasury Control and also the Sukarno Trust. And they underwrite all the world's currencies. Now, we might talk a little bit more about some of that later if we have time, but I would really rather spend time talking about this process so that people understand that they do have a remedy for this concept of debt, because that's all it is. It's a concept. Once people come to understand that everything in the public, with that,
Okay, that's good.
We have folks in the audience that might not appreciate some of that cowboy talk.
No, they don't. They probably all squat with their spurs on too, but that's neither here nor there. So, all right.
Well, anyway, when we broke, we were kind of talking about the concepts of negotiable instruments, the two types. Had pointed out that the United States government is in fact the constitutor, so all debts return to the United States through a method called Treasury Direct, or promissory notes and so forth can be taken to the federal window by a corporation. And so we use promissory notes in many instances, for some of these situations, or in some situations, depending on what it is, we might use acceptance for value, whereas we create a bill of exchange for settlement and closure. So now this, to those of your audience who are kind of new to this thought process, I won't burden them with a whole lot of technology involving negotiable instruments at this time. But let's move forward with the concept and look at the consequences of this system as it was introduced in 1933. Along about the 1990s, there were some fellows, pretty smart fellows as it turns out. One of them I'm very well acquainted with, a man named Roger Elvig. Roger is one of those grandfather types. He's a kind old gentleman at this point. His occupation is farmer. He's a farmer for crying out loud. Listen, I tell you what, them farmers, I'm scared of those people.
Yeah.
When I have seminars and stuff and farmers show up, I'm quaking in my boots because I know I can't put no foolishness past them. Anyway, right. Roger's a farmer. His history was his grandfather owned a couple of banks, farmer merchant type banks on that scale. And then when he passed away, he bequeathed those to Roger's father. Then they had the Great Depression. The father, in order to try to save one of the banks, mortgaged the family farm and lost everything. So Roger had that heritage, and so certainly being an inquisitive type, he wanted to find out how did that all happen. So he studied, and then in the 90s and so forth, in the 80s and into the 90s, when the banks were doing all of those foreclosures on farms and ranches, then certainly things picked up pretty good. Roger made some efforts in those respects, and for his trouble, he got thrown in federal prison for 6 years, which is okay. I hope Roger's not listening, but it seems that Roger does his very best work when he's in jail. Because if he's not out there on the tractor or doing whatever, then he has more time to think. He's a great thinker.
I have heard that. Roger is probably the slickest man alive, and he did that 6-year stretch. So he's out now, right?
Oh yeah, he came out in I think in the mid 90s. And listen, when he came out, the government sent word around to all the financial institutes and banks and everything, which the message was this: Roger's coming out, and we don't know what he's going to do.
He's a very dangerous man.
Well, he's not. He's dangerous in the respect that he sees things as they really are.
Yes.
And being a farmer, he is involved in the real world.
Right.
And so you can't lie on the farm. If you lie on the farm, you lose your crop.
Correct.
And so farmers don't lie. Farmers tell the truth. So Roger's prone to tell the truth. So, but anyway, about that period of time, he was doing a lot of research study. He had some very intelligent men around him. And so they started to work on this system to find out what the problem was. And they went all the way back to 1933 with House Joint Resolution 192 and so forth. And they started to put the pieces together to see how the system properly operated. Now, when they had gone so far in the thing, they said, what shall we call this? And they said, let's call this commercial redemption. Now, One of the things that I have stressed to people time and time again, if you want to study commerce, go and study the King James Version of the Holy Bible, because all of the principles and so forth that we operate with are contained therein. So our commercial system, capitalism, free enterprise, and all these kind of things are inventions of Christianity. And so the primer book to study for commerce is King James Version. And here's another tidbit that people don't know, but the man who was in charge of the translators was a man named Robert Flood. And Robert Flood was the Grand Master of the Priory of Zion and closely associated with the Knights Templars.
Okay.
So the King James Version was translated with a particular point of view in mind. Now, it's not the same as Geneva Bible. It's not the same as the apocryphal books and all those kind of things. But the King James Version was translated for a particular reason. And get this now. When that version came out, King James said that this King James Version of the Holy Bible is an authority in all churches and in the courts.
Huh.
Now, why is it they used to, have people put their hand on the Bible to swear? You see,
Because it was an authority of the court.
Why is it that when you go to court, the bailiff comes out and says, "All rise"? You're not rising for the judge. Historically, when they had court, the bailiff came out first carrying the King James Version, and the judge was behind him. Historically, people rose out of respect for King James Version. That's how all that started. Okay. Anyway, that's beside the point. All right. So about this period of time, Roger and some of those around him were starting to develop the basic concepts of what we refer to today as commercial redemption, which included the acceptance for value process and many other things which go along with that. Now, I first came upon this in 1998. We had a study group where I was living at the time. We were studying basically what people call common law, statutes, and all those kind of things. And then somebody brought to our meeting one Monday evening some cassette tapes of a seminar which was done where they addressed commercial redemption. And we heard a word. We heard a word that threw us because we didn't know what it meant. And the word was claim. C-L-A-I-M. Claim. And we thought, claim? What's that got to do with anything? But the more we delved into it, we saw that that was the most important word in the present system of law, if you want to call it that we have. People don't realize that our whole system converted over into basically admiralty procedure. Now, if you go back in our original Constitution, under the bankruptcy, they set up 3 jurisdictions, the common law, equity, and admiralty. And then along the line, certainly I think by around 1970, they had combined all of the procedures for law, equity, and admiralty into one procedure, which they called the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, which have been codified in all the states. So, that is the system that we use, but the admiralty principles and the admiralty courts are what you're actually dealing with, because a lot of people have caught on to that when they saw what kind of flag they were using. They were using an American war flag, or what's called the Stars and Stripes, with a fringe around it. And now, hey, listen, I served my time. Actually, I was in the Marine Corps, but we were part of the Department of Navy, and I do know what a gold fringe means. That's the Admiral's flag. And so anyway, we have these admiralty courts, which are all in rem proceedings, and I don't need to go into all that. I can explain it later on or whatnot. But anyway, we're operating as if we're in the admiralty jurisdiction using, listen to this now, we're using quasi-law, which means as if it's law. And there's a whole lot of implications that can come from that, and there's a whole lot of meaning to that term quasi-law. Now, if you look in your Code of Federal Regulations, I think it's, maybe 27 CFR 7211 or something like that, it lists all the crimes right down to murder, and it calls them commercial crimes.
What? Wow.
Exactly. Wake up, America.
So basically you're depriving the government of its property if you kill somebody.
Exactly, because now let's go back to 1933 again, and this concept of slavery that was instituted to pay off that final bankruptcy, and the way they did it was with the pledge system. Now let me describe a pledge system. I think that everybody pretty much familiar with a pawn shop, okay? And when you take something in for a pawn, let's say it's a radio. So you take your radio into the pawn shop, and the guy there says, okay, he says, I'll loan you $10 against that radio. I'll hold the radio, and I'll give you the $10 in the pawn slip. If you want it back in a certain time, then you bring back in the pawn slip, you bring back in the $10 plus interest, and I'll give you back the radio. Okay, so that's how a pawn works. But a pledge is a special pawn in as much as, rather than taking the radio to the pawn shop, you take the title to the radio, you take that to the pawn shop. Now, okay, so we get into this last period of bankruptcy under slavery, and so rather than taking the bodies of the people to the pawn shop, what they did was they created titles to the people in what we call birth certificates. Okay, that's the title that was created by the government so they could operate a pledge system. And we got all kinds of people standing up at football games and everything else, singing the national anthem, the flag passes by, and they put their hand on their heart and pledge allegiance to the flag, which is the war flag, by the way, of the United States of America. So we have this problem going on. But in any event, the solution to the problem that the controllers saw was that they would use the pledge system in order to gain control of the collateral, which is not actually the physical body of the people, but it's what they produce. Huh. That's what they're after. They don't want the people. I mean, what are they going to do? Feed and clothe you and change your baby's diapers?
No.
That's not what they wanted to do. But what they wanted to do was have a claim on the energy and the products that the people produced by their labor.
Which is basically equity, isn't it? I mean, that's like a bank who says, I don't want your house. They want the equity in your house to be able to borrow against it. Therefore,
exactly,
they want the equity of the person. There's not too much difference in that. So how does this? And actually,
okay, but now look at here now.
All right, let's look at here.
Pardon my hillbilly expressions.
No, I love it. Yeah. Look, let's look at here, pard.
Look at here now, you flatlander.
That's right.
So the pledge system was instituted. The titles were pledged to the debt, and because of that, then after the 70 years, the debt was paid, and the people were freed from their slavery.
But that didn't last long.
Well, it lasted until 1999, and Bill Clinton told the only straight story in his life when he said, I'm the last United States president, because he knew he was. Right. Things were changing. And so a cabal coup was planned so that they could take over control of the United States and the people and all the assets and so forth. And that coup was effectuated when they knocked down those twin towers and declared war on the world.
Right.
No. So we're trying to correct that, and we are.
So even Stephen, my producer, has a couple of questions. His questions are, who do you report the crimes to? Who enforces the law? And who actually protects you from the judge?
All right.
If everything's commercial, we got to go back to the murder being commercial, and it's all commercial bonds. And I've written some articles on this to show people that it's all that it's all about bonds. You can present, and I've used bonds to write off court cases for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, and they completely work on the court cases. When we then try to put them into the banks, however, the banks are resistant, shall we say? They never give the bonds back, but then they claim, well, it's just nonsense,
You're probably doing that a little bit wrong, and let me tell you how you're doing it wrong and how you could correct that to a better effect.
Okay.
If you take those instruments into a bank, don't send them to them, but have them delivered to the bank manager, the bank president, with a demand or a request that they present them at the federal window.
Okay.
Which they are required to do.
All right.
Now, once those things are presented at the federal window, then the U.S. government, which is responsible for the debt, will do an electronic transfer into those accounts to settle them. Right now, you know, the reason why you're not able to get the banks to do compliance is because you're not taking them to the proper banker and making that demand that they take it to the federal window for settlement.
Okay. Interesting.
All right, so it's that little nuance there. It might help you out a little bit.
All right.
All right. Now, in regards to the question that was asked, let me address it this way quickly. And that is, it's important to conceptualize of what we would call the two sides of the coin. One side of the coin we would call public, and the other side of the coin we would call private. And so the resolution to some of the public dilemmas that you're facing would first be settled on the private side and then taken into the public for settlement. And have we done that? Yes, we have. And yeah, I don't have time now to talk about how to go about doing all that, but that is the answer to that question, is that when a public official misbehaves, how do you deal with it? You first deal with it on the private side, and then you take it to the public for liquidation. For instance, way back in 2002, we had started doing this stuff all along, but in 2002 we were having some problems with the IRS. They were sending out presentments but refusing to provide the coupon or the check, as the remedy for that thing. And so we put a lot of pressure onto them, and we did get to change. What we basically did, several people, we liquidated the IRS to the tune of about $400 billion. And that $400 billion then, of course, was charged back to the use of the republic, which is the private side of government. And people would ask me, Winston, how do you know that worked? And I said, what's the prime rate? And sure enough, because of that $400 billion being put back it was put back against the principal of the debt, not the interest. It went back against the principal. And in consequence of that, the prime rate dropped a whole quarter of a point. So does it work? The answer is yes, it does. How do you know? Like I told people, just watch the prime rate.
All right, so we got about 6 minutes, maybe 7 minutes left here. So give us some practical application. First off, before we go down the home stretch here, let's tell people about your seminar. You want to give us a little plug for your seminar?
We're kind of out of time for discussion here, but let me tell you about our upcoming webinar and also our full-blown seminar. Now, here recently, we have discovered how to take control on the private side. And this is a real hummer, man. This is a great thing. Using this one particular process, which I've, described in some of our previous seminars and so forth. But for instance, I helped a couple of my friends through this whole process. And so the one fella, actually he's a retired policeman. After doing this process, he went to his friend who was a bail bondsman. Now, bail bondsmen can look at a whole lot of stuff. So he went to the bail bondsman and said, hey, run my name and see what you find. Bail bondsman came back and said, you do not exist. Now, what he was saying was the all capital letter straw man had been removed from all the files. In essence, what I had done, or what his new status, he had changed from U.S. citizen into what the government calls a non-resident alien, or which we would better describe as an American national. Now, please note, and note this carefully, I did not say sovereign. I said American national. I don't use that word sovereign.
Well, none of us do, and we've tried to tell people, even though in the press they're now trying to say that sovereign citizens are more dangerous than Arab terrorists and that they kill police and all this other stuff, and that if you just tear up your driver's license, you don't have to use it anymore and all that nonsense. So
okay, but let me get back to the webinar, because on the webinar, once again, I'm going to show this process. I'm going to go through it step by step. You know, the webinar is only 2 hours long, so I don't have the time to build up to that. But in our seminar that we're going to do at the ECETI Ranch on Labor Day weekend, I'll have time to build up to it so that it's understood for what it is. So the webinar, again, is on the 15th of this month, and the seminar at the ECETI is going to be September the 4th through the 6th. And for information as how to sign up for the webinar and also to sign up to attend the seminar, go to our website, www.wssic.com, which stands for Winston Shrout Solutions in Commerce. If you have questions that you can't find on the website, then there's a phone number. And during business hours, certainly Monday through Thursday, if you call in, there'll be a lady who answers the phone and help you to arrange for those things. Now, this is an important concept that I'm putting out. I wish if everybody in America understood this and did it, that would be the end of the damn problems. Because we'd stop being United States citizens who are enemies of the state and considered as enemy combatants, who don't have access to the Fourth Amendment nor to the 14th Amendment if you wanted to use it, because we're enemies of the state. And so I'm going to show how to remove some of those obstacles. And the title for the seminar at ECETI is Removing Commercial Karma. And that is, you know, people are working hard at this time on their spirituality. They're meditating, they're praying, and doing a lot of things. Yet, as I point out, it's real hard to meditate when a third-party debt collector is banging on your door or when the sheriff comes to throw you out of the house. So, to facilitate the what people call ascension or uplifting or whatever you want to call it, I will show how to remove the commercial karma so that you can move forward in your spiritual desires more readily. So that's the purpose. That's the aim of this webinar and of this seminar that we have coming up.
So, talk about the webinar, and then how do people see you in person, Winston?
Well, if you don't see me in person, I don't know what good that would do.
No, I mean, it's to see you in person as far as you have a webinar, but you also have a seminar where people can come see you in person. Yes.
Yeah,
that's what I mean.
Yeah, I'll be there. I'll be there live and in person.
But you see you on the TV, you see you on the computer screen. Are you having a live seminar where people can go?
Yeah, the webinar is done across the computer. It's a real-time event.
I get that, but can people come see you in person somewhere? Are you actually giving an in-person seminar somewhere soon?
I'm getting to that.
All right. We're running out of time, though. That's the problem.
Okay, yeah. So the webinar, you can go on the website and find out about that. And then for the seminar, you can do the same thing.